Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to show you all the books that I read in May. So this video is coming up a little bit later than what I usually like, but we're just going to go with it. In May I read a total of 7 books, and that is around the usual number that I can get to in any given month, so that's perfectly fine and perfectly normal. 4 of those were audiobooks and 3 were physical reads, and that's a little bit unusual. Normally I read a little bit more physical reads than audiobooks, but apparently it fluctuates. Now, of those 7 books, all of them are in the fantasy genre. Nobody is surprised about that. 2 were standalones, I'm happy with that, and then 5 were parts of series. 2 were continuations of series. I'm happy that I am making progress in my series, because I definitely should if you look at all of the unfinished series that I have on my TBR. And then 3 were actually starts of new series. But it's not as bad as it sounds, because of those 3 I can actually only make progress in 1. The other 2 were new releases, so I'm now waiting for the sequel to arrive. So it's not my fault, it's the author's fault that I haven't finished those series yet. Now, without further ado, let's just get into the pile, and as always I go into chronological order, so I start with the one that I finished first and then go towards the end of the month. And the first book that I finished was City of Dragons by Robin Hobb. This was an audiobook. This is the second book in the Rainwild Chronicles by Robin Hobb, which is the 4th sub-series in her big series, The Realm of the Elderlings. I actually really enjoyed this one. I think that a lot of it has to do with expectations, because even people who love The Realm of the Elderlings tell me that the Rainwild Chronicles is their least favorite sub-series, that it's just weak, and in general, even people telling me that upon a reread, they don't reread the Rainwild Chronicles because they just don't like it. So I was almost dreading getting into this series. I thought that I wasn't going to like it either, but I actually already enjoyed the first book quite a bit, and now the second one was a step up from that first one. So I'm really enjoying my time here, and I think that it's good that I maybe went in with lower expectations, because I can definitely see that from this point and from the sub-series that I have read, this is probably my least favorite one. But it's still amazing. It's still, I think that the first one I would give 4 stars. This one I would probably give 5 stars if we're talking about stars, which I normally don't do. But that at the very least means that this is a series that I'm enjoying quite a bit. I also really like the narration, so of course that helps when you are getting through audiobooks. I think that a part of it, why a lot of people don't like this, is because you do have a bit of romance. So first of all, you have a main character who is young, and she can be annoying. She has a lot of things going on that teenagers have going on. So that can be a little bit annoying to follow, but I think that she's a very realistic character, and I think that she also has some very redeeming qualities as well. So I kind of like watching her journey, but that's not the thing that I like most of all. I actually like the older woman, Elise, who is not old, but I think that she's 30 plus at this point. She is in an unhappy marriage, and I like watching that. I think that maybe a lot of Robin Hobb fans aren't the biggest fans of romance in their books. Now, this is by no means a fancy romance or anything like that, but the plot is much more romance-driven than any of her other sub-series. I actually like that. I think that romance is a part of life, so especially looking at a marriage that has some issues and how Elise, especially because she's one of the POVs, how she deals with that was something that I found quite enjoyable. And the first book was okay. This one was, I think that this was definitely a step up, and how this one ended makes me want to pick up the third one as soon as possible. So this one was a success. After that, I finished a physical read, and that was The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, which is the first book in the Empire of the Wolf series. Now, this was a new release, so I read this one, the first in the series, and now I'm waiting for the sequel, and I'm definitely going to read that sequel, because I actually quite enjoyed this one. Now, I have a full review, which is a rapid review, in a video where I talk about 3 new releases that I recently read, so The Justice of Kings and then 2 other ones. I will link that in the description box down below if you want to watch that afterwards. Now, this is a grimdark series, and this first novel you can definitely feel it. I don't think that it has a lot of explicit content, so if that's something that you don't like in grimdark, this is still going to be fine, but it's a very grim and bleak atmosphere. We're actually following a justice who is the entire legal system into one, but we don't follow from his POV, but from his clerk's POV, Helena. And I think that none of the characters are extremely likable. A lot of them are flawed, and if you need to follow likable characters, this might not be for you, but I actually like to follow flawed characters, so I was eating this up, to be honest. I really enjoyed it. I also think that the feeling of dread. Helena is telling you her life story, and so from the get-go you actually know that this empire is going to fall, and that this is going to have major implications on all of the people that we're following here. So I actually really liked that. Now, the middle part dragged a little bit for me, and I wish that there were just some minor things that changed, but the inclusion of religion and how that plays a role in the fall of this empire, following all of these characters who have some very interesting character arcs. I think that without spoiling anything, if you like to see the downfall of characters, this is also going to be one that you will absolutely adore, and I do. I like that kind of story. So yes, this is one that, even though it has some minor issues, I think that this is also a debut author. I like the story and just the general atmosphere of this book enough that I will definitely be continuing this series as well. I think that around the same time of reading The Justice of Kings, I also listened to an audiobook, and that was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Now, this was part of a buddy read over on Mike's Book Reviews Discord. There are a lot of unofficial buddy reads, and this was one that was being hosted last month. Now, I must say that I think that this is probably my least favorite book that I read in May. It doesn't mean that I didn't like it, but it was very middle of the road. I had a lot of issues with it, and I definitely liked Circe by Madeline Miller a lot more. I think that the writing style here is beautiful. It's Madeline Miller. She writes beautiful prose, and just in general, I think that if that's something that you find important, you're probably going to like her works. Now, I'm somebody who can definitely appreciate that. If I like the story and if I like the characters, having beautiful prose is just the icing on the cake. But it's never going to be something that makes me love a book. If anything, if the rest is not good enough, then I don't really care that much about prose. It's a nice extra, but it's not that important to me. So here we are following, of course, Achilles, but we're not following from Achilles' POV, we're following from Patroclus, who was Achilles' lover. And we follow him from the start, so when he is a young boy, we follow him when he grows up, when he meets Achilles, and when they go to the Trojan War, and everything that happens afterwards. I think that my biggest issue here was that Patroclus is just a very meh character. His biggest character trait, if you can even call it a character trait, is that he loves Achilles, and that he will stand by Achilles no matter what Achilles does. That felt a little bit boring. I wanted to see some more dimensions in him as a character. I think that the start was quite strong when he didn't meet Achilles yet. And then towards the end, what Madeline Miller does with the end, I really enjoyed. But the middle part dragged for me. I also think that maybe she stays quite close to how these people are portrayed in the original myths. And Achilles, for that, I didn't really enjoy. And I don't really mind if I don't like characters or if I find them annoying. But here, they didn't really feel like actual people. And that's something that I usually don't like. So I definitely like Circe better. I think that there she managed to make Circe feel like an actual person, while here Achilles and Patroclus didn't feel like that to me. So my least favorite one, I think that if you like writing style a lot and if you pay a lot of attention to that, you will probably like this one. And I do know that there are people who like The Song of Achilles more than Circe, so try to find out for yourself. But for me, I was expecting more from this one, especially because I do like romance in my books, like I said. I think that's part of life. And I know that before going in, I knew that this one had a pretty big romance. So I thought, well, that would probably mean that I like this one more than Circe. And in the end, it was the opposite way around. But I was also not the biggest fan of Circe. I liked it, it was a fine book. I thought it wasn't really worth the hype. So maybe I'm just not the biggest Madeline Miller fan compared to others. After The Song of Achilles, I actually picked up another myth retelling. And that one was Kaik by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a new release, and I'm actually going to film a rapid review for this one in the course of June. But I need to read one more new release so that I have a batch of 3 for that video. So that one is coming soon. Now, I actually like this one a lot more than The Song of Achilles. Partially, of course, because it feels like a breath of fresh air, because I don't really read a lot of Indian myth retellings. As a matter of fact, this is the first one. And there are definitely a lot of stories about the Trojan War. So this one felt more unique, more new, and I was more intrigued to see these gods. Because, of course, it's a myth retelling, you have a lot of gods. I don't really know a lot about Indian gods and their myths. So it felt like I was discovering a whole new world, almost. I also really liked what the author did with Kaik. So we follow her from when she's a young girl. She's actually telling you her life story, which is one of the tropes that I love so much in books. So of course I was immediately in love, and I think that she portrayed Kaik as a nuanced character very well. There are also a lot of themes that I found very interesting. Kaik is a person who in this world tried to make a better life for women, and of course in this time period women were less than men, so when she tried to change that as a queen, of course she got some backlash, and we really delve into that, and I really enjoyed seeing that, and just also seeing Kaik's role as a mother. So I think that this one has a lot of important themes, and it is told in a way that is very enjoyable to read. Now, a lot of myth retellings are tragedies, or original myths are tragedies, I should say, and throughout the story I immediately had the feeling from the start until the end that this is very tragic, and almost at times it was too heavy to read because it felt like this is not going to end well. I'm not going to tell you if it ends well or not, but just know that that's a feeling that you will have throughout the book, so that's quite important to know. But all in all, I really enjoyed this one, and if this author comes out with another book, another myth retelling, hopefully I will definitely pick that one up as well. Then another audiobook that I finished. I'm definitely going back and forth between physical reads and audiobooks, and that one was The King of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. This is the second book in the Broken Empire trilogy by this author. Now, this is an unofficial buddy read on my channel. We have a couple of people in Discord who are reading this one. We're reading one book a month. So this month I'm actually going to read Emperor of Thorns, which is the conclusion of this trilogy. Now, last month's wrap up, I talked about Prince of Thorns and that I didn't really like it. It was a middle of the road book, but I don't know about you, but I'm not looking for middle of the road books. Those are actually my least favorite ones. I'm looking for 4 stars or more. So if a book is 3 stars, that's not what I'm looking for. And Prince of Thorns felt like that. We follow York. York is a bad boy. He does very bad stuff. And in the first one, you just see all of the things that he does and how badass he is and how he always gets away with stuff. And I didn't really like it, especially because he's a very young character. He felt very one-dimensional, which is something that I don't really enjoy. The secondary characters were not well fleshed out at all. And the story was extremely fast-paced. Now, these are choices of the author. I'm not saying that he did a bad job at it. I'm just saying that for me, I just like a different type of fantasy story, and that's why I didn't really enjoy the first one as much as I would have liked. I do think that Mark Lawrence has a beautiful writing style. It's almost poetic in a sense, which is very nice to read when you're reading grimdark. It's really nice balance, or it's a very strange feeling when you have beautiful writing style and then you have some very grim things happening in the story. Now, because I didn't really like that first book, I didn't have high expectations for this one. And this one was actually a lot better. Now, some of the things that were happening in the first book or that were present in the first book are still present here because these are choices of the author. It's still very fast-paced and there are still some things that I just don't like, and because of that it will never be a favorite series. But we see more of York and he gets more nuanced and we see more of his background, of his childhood and why he is the way he is. I also think that we see some secondary characters, Catherine for example, that I liked a lot and that we see more fleshed out. So that was also something that I found quite enjoyable. With York we also have one timeline where we see some more of his family, and that was definitely my favorite timeline, so I do hope that we see more of that in the third book. Now this is definitely a story with multiple timelines, and sometimes that was confusing for me because, like I said, it is very fast paced and the timelines, like you have present time and then you have 4 years earlier, are very similar. In both timelines they are traveling through a forest, and sometimes that made me very confused. What is happening now? Are we now in present time or are we 4 years earlier? So I think that this maybe could have been handled better. But the writing style is beautiful. I'm liking York as a character more. Like I said, I understand him better now, and I'm liking the secondary characters more. And also here, the plot in general was just more to my liking. So I'm very happy that I'm liking this one more, and now I do hope that the third one is going to be my favorite. And then in general, this will be a series that I enjoyed. If the third one goes downhill towards how I liked the first one, but in any case, I do know that Mark Lawrence is an author that I like his writing style, so I will be trying more of him, whether or not I will like the Broken Empire trilogy as a whole or not. Then a physical read that I liked so much, and that is The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This is the first book in the Drowning Empire trilogy, and I actually have a full spoiler-free review for this book that I will link in the description box down below. I had to talk about it. I know that a lot of people have talked about it already, but I loved it so much. I was so blown away by it, and I actually was not expecting that I felt like I should put out a review for people who are maybe feeling similar to me to finally get them to pick this book up. This one I think I got 2 years ago for my birthday, and at that time I was new to BookTube, so I was basically picking up a lot of books that BookTubers were talking about without really knowing my own taste yet. And then throughout the years I kind of figured out that this one has a lot of things or a lot of buzzwords that I normally don't gravitate towards. We have multiple POVs, people say that it's quite fast-paced. I don't really agree with that. I think that it has normal pacing, it's definitely not slow, but I wouldn't call it fast-paced like the Broken Empire trilogy, for example. They say that it have a hard magic system, and normally I'm not a fan of hard magic systems, so there was definitely a lot that I thought I was not going to like. However, Andrea Stewart does all of that so amazingly that I ended up really enjoying it. I like this magic system. Yes, it's hard, but it's not too hard. And you also have some magic systems here that are soft as well, and you have a lot of mystery. I'm a big fan when a book has mystery, and when you are finding out things together with the characters, and you're really following them, and when they get to discover something, you discover it as well. And sometimes, even when it has twists, because this book definitely has a lot of twists, even if I wasn't really surprised by the twist because I saw it coming, I'm still really invested because I want to know how the character is going to react. So yes, in the end, a book that I really enjoyed, and I cannot wait to pick up The Bone Shard Emperor, which is the second book, and the third one is coming out in 2023. So that does mean that I'm almost on track with this series as well. And then another new release that I finished and that I will talk about in a batch review together with Kaik, and that is Scorpio by G.R. McAllister. This is the first one in the Five Queendom series, so a new series. I don't know when the second one will be coming out, but this one is difficult for me to talk about because sometimes you have a book and you know that there are definitely some issues, some things that you didn't like in the book, or there is a book that you know there are some things that you absolutely loved. And then you have a book like this, which is fine, but there aren't really things that I absolutely loved, and there aren't any things that I absolutely hated. It was middle of the road, and that's it. Now, I'm still intrigued enough that I will be picking up the second book when it comes out, or at least I will listen to the reviews, but this one I was just expecting more, I guess. In this one, we follow 5 matriarchies, and then something happens, which is a very big plotline in the first book, and that is that girls stop being born. Now, I thought that this was going to delve into the political intrigue. What does this mean for these 5 queendoms? Maybe we have some patriarchies beyond these 5 queendoms as well. Maybe this is going to have an effect. Maybe we see some economical struggles because of this. But in the end, we didn't really see a lot. And it was almost like, this is happening, this is like the backdrop of all of it, but now we're going to follow these characters, and we actually don't really see a lot of what is happening with these girls that are stopped being born. For example, we have these different queendoms, and all of these are specialized in one thing of ruling. We have a queendom that is filled with warriors, and all of these warriors are females, so they actually sell their boys when they are born. And this is what we focus most of all, because of course now no girls are being born, what is happening here? But it felt very superficial how this was talked about. We also have one queendom where we have scholars, and there's maybe one line in this entire book which is, well, the scholars are trying to figure out why this happened. And that's it. And I thought maybe it would have been more interesting if you delved into that a little bit more, like what are these scholars doing, for example? What are they researching? How are they trying to solve this problem? So I just felt like everything was very superficial. The matriarchies, for example, they were fine. I really like that all of the POVs in this book are of females, are of women, and that is something that is quite unique in adult fantasy, so I really enjoyed that. But I think that the author could have done more with that, because in the end, the matriarchies didn't feel like they were different than patriarchies. We could have followed 5 patriarchies with boys stop being born, and it would have been the exact same story. There wasn't really anything added to it. So I think that in the end, I just felt like this was interesting. It had an interesting magic system. I liked the characters. I liked their own subplots. But the overall idea of these patriarchies and girls that are not being born anymore was not really explored. So I think that I just needed to go into this one with different expectations. I think if people go into this one with different expectations and don't really expect a very dense and a very elaborate world, that is going to be fine. This one feels like a book that you can read in between other books, but I know that somebody actually has this one as a favorite. So, but if that wasn't the case, I would be surprised if somebody told me this is a favorite, because it just feels like a little bit like a middle-of-the-road book, I suppose. So this one I was expecting more of, but in the end, I did enjoy it still. So those are all of the books that I have read in May. Please let me know in the comments down below what you have read in May. Do you have any surprises, positive or negative? Definitely let me know. If you want to see some more of the myth retellings that I have read recently, I actually have an entire video with recommendations that you can find right here. And there I do talk about the Song of Achilles and Kaik, but a lot of other ones as well. As always, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and see you next time. Bye!